Welcome to the Rule of Law, the Academy Speaks, and I'm Joe Tucker, President of the International Academy of Trial Lawyers. And it's often easy to feel overwhelmed when institutions, judges, and lawyers are being attacked by an administration that some feel does not respect the rule of law. As I've said before, though, one lawyer can inspire another lawyer and another lawyer until we have a movement, and a movement can spur action. Today, I am happy to have my really good friend and fellow fly fisherman, Ted Schmidt, here on the podcast. Ted and I are great buddies. He's a fellow of the Academy. But today, Ted, we're going to talk about you being president of the Arizona State Bar. How large is the Arizona State Bar, Ted?
25,000 lawyers.
So you are the head of 25,000 lawyers. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is some of the things that you've done as president of the State Bar of Arizona to help defend the rule of law. Why don't you talk to us about some of the confines? Because I know as president of the Bar Association, we have Keller versus the State Bar of California, which is a sort of a guidepost for what you can and can't do. And for those of our listeners who don't understand what Keller, the California bar is about, why don't you give us a quick background on that?
Sure. So, Joe, let me start by simply saying that it was the International Academy that inspired me to make the rule of law the theme of my presidency this year with the State Bar, starting with Roman's Dean address, your address, Paul's focus. Really got me on track with this. Keller, to answer your question, is a U.S. Supreme Court decision that basically says that in those state bars like Arizona, where it's mandatory for you to practice law that you be a member of the bar, that the bar has to be circumscribed in their activities. We can't violate some lawyer that's a member of our bar's First Amendment rights by getting into political issues that perhaps that member doesn't agree with, for example. So our mission under Keller is regulate lawyers and do what you can to improve the quality of legal services, but stay out of taking a position on gun rights or LGBTQ or whatever it is that might offend some members that are forced to pay dues to your organization.
So
So,
how are you doing? So then what are you doing now as it relates to defending the rule of law without running afoul of the Keller decision?
so I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff, Joe. To start off with, I get to write a message in our monthly magazine that every lawyer gets. And every one of my messages have been on the rule of law, everything from what is it to why lawyers are particularly suited to advocate for it, how to do that, where to do that, all of that sort of thing. I established a task force. It included our Chief Justice of our Supreme Court and some other major political leaders in our state to come up with recommendations for what our state bar could do to protect and promote the rule of law. They came out with a report in January. I then
And
created a working.
I want to stop you for a second. Tell us about that report that they came out that you helped get started, Ted, because that was really great move by you.
So the first thing was they recommended amending the rule that our Supreme Court has that creates us as a bar, that to make it specifically, expressly part of our mission to promote and protect the rule of law, which will open a lot of doors for us to to do that. And with the Chief Justice on that task force, that was important. Secondly, they recommended that we establish a speakers bureau and that we give lawyers the tools to go out in the community and talk to members of the public, people in schools, churches, Rotary clubs, wherever, about the rule of law. What is it? Why it's important? Why you need to hold it dear to your heart and do the right things. Uh,
Well,
so
that's what I've been talking about, Ted, on these about action. And that seems like an action plan that you guys have put into place there in Arizona. How has that worked out?
Well, so we're developing a PowerPoint presentation that lawyers could. We figure the easier we make this for people, the better. So we're developing a PowerPoint presentation. We'll have a short training session to help lawyers know exactly how to do this and to stay in keeping with Keller, and then charge them to go out in the community and start delivering the message. We're also going to recommend to our Supreme Court that they give our lawyers CLE credit for doing this. So there's a reward for taking the time to do it. And we're
Well,
doing the same thing in the schools.
Well, what I see that action even beyond the bar association, you talk about lawyers going to schools and things like that. And oftentimes we lawyers are called upon to go to schools to speak profession day. And I've been very big that we don't teach civics in high school anymore. So people don't understand what civics, uh, what it means and the understanding of separation of powers and the three co-equal branches. What are you suggesting for us younger lawyers who, not even necessarily from the bar association, but when we're going to school, when we're going to schools and we're speaking at career days and things like that, what are your suggestions for us?
Well, my suggestions are,
And notice I say us like I'm a younger lawyer too, Ted.
yeah, for sure. So, I think the first thing is look for a good vehicle. What we're doing in Arizona is on Constitution Day, the week of Constitution Day, we send an announcement out to all of our middle schools and elementary schools, offering lawyers to come and speak, and we have materials for those lawyers to help them do that. But I try to make it easy for people. I say, you could go to the Arizona Bar Foundation website and you can see the materials. You go, but where do you have a connection? I went and this last September and spoke at one of my grandkids' middle school because my son introduced me to the teacher, and we went in and did a little dog and pony show. How do we do it? We talk about really very basic things like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, why it's important. We talk about it enough that we actually engage the students and allow them to, what's your favorite Bill of Rights? What's your favorite one of the first 10 minutes to our Constitution? And engage them in discussion on it and get them interested in it. I think that's the best starting point. And then to try to foster other programs in the school like mock trial and mock congressional hearings and stuff like that to help. Because I think you're exactly right, Joe. I think the civics education is really lacking. I should also put a pitch out real quick. Sandra Day O'Connor, right here in Arizona, has created a foundation with all kinds of resources that young lawyers can go to her website and get materials to help them know how they can go into schools and talk to young people about the rule of law and the Constitution.
Well, I'm into these small acts also, Ted, because many of the people who are listening here, some are lawyers and some are non-lawyers who I've been hearing from, these small acts, I keep saying, create a movement. How are these small acts that you've been doing, whether it's talking in schools and what you've been hearing from your other colleagues when we're out here speaking to the public, how have they been impacting? You think this is working, or are we just, excuse the expression, pissing in the wind?
I think Joe, I really do think it is working. And I think your earlier comments were really right on point. You start talking about this, you're making a big deal about this. You motivate other people to do the same thing. I think it starts as basic as the dinner table at home. Talk about it with the family. Practice your elevator speech there. Get some discussion going there. And then think about other places where your law firm. Let's have a lunch and talk about this, guys. We're lawyers. We swore an
Well,
oath to uphold the Constitution. This is an important point in our time when we need to be advocates, disciples, if you will, for the rule of law. So let's talk about how we're going to do that. How can we do that as members of this firm and our community? And I think
Ted,
what I'm
one of
finding
the many things, one of the main things I love is that you're fired up and you're fired up for the rule of law. And I apologize for interrupting. You keep on going, my man.
so what I find is is you plant that seed. somebody has that conversation at the dinner table and one of their teenage kids gets engaged and they have a really good discussion about it. And the next thing you know, that person's, well, maybe I could go to your school and I could give a talk to the kids at school. Then and I find it as people get more and more engaged in the topic, the more fired up they get about it, and the more likely they are to take more and more steps and get more and more involved. And I think
But
that's how.
here's what I'm hearing from, ordinary folks as well as lawyers. I am tired. I'm burned out. It just doesn't seem to make a difference. What's the outrage of the day? How do one, do you keep motivated by this, Ted? And two, what's your motivation that you tell other people out there that don't give up that this is important?
Well, so I'm motivated because I see when I talk to people about it, I see light bulbs going off. And I see that it is possible to have conversations with people where we don't get into arguments about politics, where we can stay above the weeds and say, why this is an important thing to us. And then I look to the fact that, in our in our form of government, there's reason to be hopeful here. I mean, we do have midterm elections coming up. I think that you talk to people, I talk to people, the germ spreads, more and more people get involved in this, and more people are going to see the light of day, and that change can happen. And that we do have a system of government where change can, it's already happening. There's like 177 lawsuits that have been filed to stop actions that are in violation of the rule of law. There are dozens and dozens of universities that are now starting to stand up and say, wait a minute, we're going to stand up for what's right here, and we're going to stand up for the rule of law. So I think I see the makings of a movement. You talked about a movement. I see the makings of a movement. We got to keep pressing on.
Well, let's go to the Keller issue again for any bar association listeners that we have or leaders in the bar association. Why has this not been a political issue? You sort of talked about it, that you can't get into the politics, but how do you suggest, and I need you to get a little granular if you don't mind on this, how do they get around Keller that this is not a Democratic issue, Republican issue, a Green Party issue, or things like that when they're promoting these subjects that you and I are talking about?
So what I say, what I tell people is I start at the beginning with, listen, Republican, Democrat, whatever your issue is, we all agree. There's a survey, the World Justice Project's done it. 98% of us, all of us agree the rule of law is important. And all of us, for different reasons, agree that the rule of law is in jeopardy in some respect. We have a shared purpose there. We don't need, we're going to have a constructive discussion about why this is important and what we can do without getting into name calling and without getting into arguing specific political issues. We can't do that under Keller, but we don't need to do that. You can look at your own personal life and your own reaction to the things you see in the news and what you think is important and what's not important, and you can react accordingly. But you can conduct meetings, you can conduct discussions by laying some ground rules at the beginning as to how we're going to do this and what we are and what we are not going to talk about. My bar convention in June, the theme is protecting the rule of law. And we're going to have a plenary session with a panel where we're going to have an open discussion with lawyers, but we're going to do it by laying these ground rules down that we're going to keep it civil, and we're going to keep it within the confines of the Keller decision and have a meaningful discussion.
Well, Ted, I like to think that Arizona is what we call a purple state if we want to make this political. Have you received pushback from people on different ends of the political spectrum about some of the things you're doing with the rule of law?
The only pushback I've received is from people who want to talk politics. That really
Hmm.
they want to make, we should be able to talk about this, we should be able to talk about that. And my reaction to that is certainly we can talk about those things, but we can't do it on a state bar platform. There are a lot of different uh, affinity bars, voluntary bars, and other community organizations, your political parties. There are places where that's appropriate and where you can do that. And I encourage you to do that. We have almost every weekend now in Arizona, we have a massive protest at the Tesla dealership down across the street from Martha's hair salon. She can't even get in to go to work some days. Uh, and I encourage people, if that's where your heart is, go down there and carry a sign. Do it. Find the avenue just within the confines of the state bar. We're not gonna get into the weeds on that sort of stuff. I wrote an op-ed piece in the newspaper that promoting the rule of law without having to get into specifics. I think people know what I'm talking about.
Ted, I'm going to ask you a basic question because sometimes it's lost when we get started talking. Why is it important that we have the rule of law here in America? And what happens if we don't have the rule of law? And I know it's a basic question, but I want to make it plain to some of our listeners.
Okay, so I think the easiest way to answer that question is to look at the World Justice Project's definition of the rule of law, and I'm just going to paraphrase for you. But basically, the rule of law stands for the proposition that the government is accountable, that we have just laws, everybody's treated the same under our laws, we're all required to obey our laws, that we have open government, and that it's accessible and impartial justice. And if you look at those basic concepts, what what is more important to a democracy? What's more important to us living in a free society where we have the right to express ourselves freely, where we have equality and justice? What is more important than upholding the rule of law?
Ted, I want to thank you for hitting it out of the ballpark today. And I hope that the passion that you've shown can be transferred to some of our listeners to see that small acts can start a movement. Small thoughts can become big thoughts. And with movements, we will have something significant going on in this country. And whatever you do, it is important. And I want to thank you for taking time to speak to us. And I want to make sure that people understand that you are the president of the entire Arizona Bar, in addition to being a fellow and a great fly fisherman. I'm looking forward to seeing you in Vancouver at our meeting. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in to listening to Ted Schmidt. Ted, you're fired up. You fired me up, and I'm hoping our listeners are fired up. Again, I'm Joe Tucker. I'm president of the International Academy of Trial Lawyers. And thank you for listening to The Rule of Law, the Academy Speaks with my buddy, Ted Schmidt.